My armor is like tenfold shields. My teeth are swords. My claws spears. The shock of my tail a thunderbolt. My wings a hurricane, and my breath death. These were the words of Smaug the Terrible. But even he, chiefest and greatest of calamities in the Third Age, was merely an echo of something far more ancient. Something born in the furnaces of the first Dark Lord, forged to break kingdoms and bend the will of the free peoples. Today, we descend into fire and shadow to uncover the true history of the dragons of Middle-earth. In all the legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien, few creations inspire such primal terror as the dragons. They are not mere beasts. They are weapons of war, masters of deceit, hoarders of kingdoms, and architects of ruin. From the father of dragons, who crawled from the pits of Angband, to the black storm, whose fall shattered mountains, to the fire drake, who turned Erebor into ash, these creatures shaped the fate of 3 ages. But where did they come from? What was their purpose? And what made them so utterly, devastatingly unstoppable? This is the complete history of the dragons of Middle-earth. The story begins in darkness. In the early First Age, Morgoth, the first and mightiest of all evils, found himself trapped. The Noldor had laid siege to his fortress of Angband, and for 400 years, the elves held him in check. His armies of orcs and wolves were insufficient. He needed something new, something that would break the spirit of his enemies before it broke their bodies. And so, in the deepest forges beneath the Iron Mountains, Morgoth began his greatest work. We do not know the exact method. Were dragons bred from ancient reptilian creatures, twisted and enlarged by dark sorcery? Or were they fallen Maiar, spirits of fire given monstrous form? Tolkien himself left this mystery unresolved, though he hinted that dragons were indeed made, not natural, but designed. What we do know is they were instruments of domination, creatures of fire and malice, infused with intelligence far beyond any beast. They could speak, they could manipulate, and they hungered, not just for flesh, but for gold, for power, for the corruption of all they touched. The first of these horrors had a name: Glaurung. In the year 260 of the First Age, the siege of Angband was shattered. Without warning, without Morgoth's command, a creature of flame burst from the gates, a serpent of fire, vast and terrible, with scales like molten iron and eyes that burned with ancient malice. This was Glaurung, and though he was young, still not fully grown, his fury was enough to scatter the forces of Fingon and drive the Noldor from the plains of Ardgalen. But the elves rallied. Fingon himself, with a company of mounted archers, pursued the dragon and humbled him, forcing Glaurung to retreat. Morgoth was furious. His weapon had revealed itself too soon. For nearly 200 years, Glaurung remained imprisoned within Angband, growing, maturing, feeding on hatred and flame. And when he emerged again, the world would tremble. In the year 455, Glaurung was unleashed in full. He led the largest army Morgoth had ever assembled. Legions of orcs, companies of balrogs, and a tide of flame that consumed everything in its path. The green fields of Ardgalen were transformed into a blackened waste, forever after known as Anfauglith, the gasping dust. This was the Dagor Bragolak, the Battle of Sudden Flame, and it shattered the siege of Angband forever. But Glaurung's power was not merely physical. He was the first dragon, yes, but he was also the first to wield the dragon spell. The hypnotic gaze that could freeze warriors where they stood. The voice that could twist memory and break minds. It was this power that would define his greatest and most terrible victory. 40 years after the Dagor Bragolak, the Noldor made one final attempt to overthrow Morgoth. The Union of Maedhros brought together the armies of elves, men, and dwarves in a coordinated assault on Angband. On the third day of battle, Glaurung entered the fray. He came like a living mountain, scales gleaming, fire pouring from his jaws. The hosts of Maedhros and Fingon were sundered, elves and men withering before the father of dragons. In the eastern field, he would have destroyed them all, had it not been for the dwarves of Belagost. Led by Lord Azaghal, the dwarves stood firm. Their great battle masks protected them from the flames, and their axes bit deep into Glaurung's hide. Enraged, the dragon trampled Azaghal, but with his dying breath, the dwarf lord drove a knife into Glaurung's belly. The dragon fled, wounded and humiliated, but the battle was already lost. The Nirneath Arnoediad, the battle of unnumbered tears, ended in catastrophe. Morgoth's victory was complete, and Glaurung's legend had only just begun. For decades after, the dragon slept, healing, biding his time. But in the year 495, Morgoth gave him a new task: destroy Nargothrond, the hidden elven realm on the river Narog. Glaurung crossed the guarded plain with an army of orcs. King Orodreth, advised by Turin, son of Hurin, rode out to meet him, a fatal mistake. The elves were crushed, Orodreth was slain, and Turin arrived too late to save the city. Glaurung passed over the bridge, smashed through the gates, and claimed Nargothrond as his own. But the dragon did not stop at conquest. He sought to destroy Turin in a far crueler way. When Turin arrived at the ruined city, Glaurung was waiting. The dragon turned his gaze upon him, and Turin was frozen, helpless, as the captives of Nargothrond were led away. Among them was Finduilas, the woman Turin loved. And then Glaurung spoke. He presented Turin with a choice: pursue the captives and rescue Finduilas, or return north to Dorloman, where his mother and sister supposedly lived in misery and servitude. Haste now, son of Hurin, the dragon hissed, or perhaps the orcs will come before you. And if you tarry, you shall never see Morwen or Nienor again. Turin, bewitched by the dragon's eyes, believed the lie. He turned north, and Glaurung laughed, for Morwen and Nienor had left Dorloman long ago and were safe in Doriath. The dragon had not merely defeated Turin, he had broken him. Years later, Glaurung encountered Nienor herself near Nargothrond. Using his spell, he wiped her memory completely, leaving her to wander the wilderness with no knowledge of who she was. She would later meet Turin, not knowing he was her brother. They would fall in love. They would marry. And when the truth was finally revealed, it would destroy them both. In the year 499, Turin hunted Glaurung. The dragon, seeking to finish his old foe, marched toward the land of Brethil, but Turin had learned from the past. He hid in the ravine of Cabed and Aris, waiting as the great serpent crossed. As Glaurung stretched his body over the chasm, Turin drove his black sword, Gurthang, into the dragon's belly, piercing him to the hilt. Glaurung screamed. His blood poured forth, burning Turin's arm and rendering him unconscious. But even in death, the dragon had one final cruelty to deliver. When Nienor arrived and found Turin, Glaurung, with his last breath, revealed the truth, that she was Nienor, Turin's sister, and that she had been living as his wife. Her memory returned. The horror of it consumed her. She cast herself into the ravine. When Turin awoke and learned the truth, he too chose death, falling upon his own sword. Glaurung, the father of dragons, died as he had lived, sowing despair, even in his final moments. Glaurung was not the greatest of dragons. That terrible honor belonged to another. After Glaurung's death, Morgoth continued breeding dragons. Some were like Glaurung, wingless, landbound, crawling terrors. Others, however, were different. Others had wings, and none were mightier than Ancalagon the Black. For over 40 years, the War of Wrath raged across Beleriand. The Valar had finally come to Middle-earth, bringing with them the host of Valinor, an army of elves, Maiar, and possibly even Valar themselves. Morgoth's forces were vast, but they were losing. In desperation, the Dark Lord unleashed his final weapon. From the pits of Angband rose the winged dragons, led by Ancalagon. Tolkien describes him as the greatest dragon in the history of the world. His size was apocalyptic. His fire could melt stone. His roar shook the foundations of the earth. The host of Valinor, which had been on the verge of victory, was driven back in chaos. The skies erupted with flame and lightning. It seemed that Morgoth would win after all. But then, from the heavens, came hope. Arundel the Mariner, father of Elrond and Elros, sailed his ship Vingilot through the sky, blessed with the power of flight by the Valar. Alongside him flew the great eagles, led by Thorondor, mightiest of all birds. The aerial battle lasted an entire day. Fire against wind, dragon against eagle, darkness against the light of the Silmaril that blazed upon Arendel's brow. And in the end, Arundel prevailed. He slew Ancalagon the Black, and the dragon fell from the sky like a thunderbolt. His body struck the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. The mountains themselves were shattered. With Ancalagon's death, Morgoth's last hope died. The War of Wrath was won. The Dark Lord was cast into the void, but the dragons were not entirely destroyed. Some of Morgoth's dragons survived. They fled to the far north, to the withered heath and the grey mountains, where they bred in secret, growing in number across the ages. These were the dragons of the Third Age, smaller than Ancalagon, perhaps, but no less deadly. There were the cold drakes, serpents that breathed ice instead of fire. In the year 2589, one such creature, the Great Cold Drake, killed King Dain the Fur of Durin's folk and his son Fror outside their own halls. The dwarves were driven from the Grey Mountains, scattered once more. And there was Scatha the Worm, a mighty dragon who hoarded treasure stolen from the dwarves, slain by Fram of the Eotheod. The dispute over Scatha's hoard nearly started a war between men and dwarves, a reminder that even in death, dragons sowed discord. But the greatest dragon of the Third Age was yet to come. In the year 2770 of the Third Age, the kingdom of Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, was the crown jewel of the dwarves. Under King Thror, it had grown rich beyond measure, its vaults overflowing with gold, jewels, and the famed Arkenstone. But such wealth does not go unnoticed. From the north came Smaug, a fire drake of terrible cunning and power. He descended upon Erebor like a hurricane, attacking at night, catching both dwarves and men by surprise. He burned the forests around the mountain. He slaughtered the warriors who came forth to fight him. He destroyed the city of Dale and killed its lord, Girion, ancestor of Bard. And then he claimed the mountain for himself. Thror and his son Thrain escaped through a secret door. Young Thorin Oakenshield, only 24 years old, survived as well. But the kingdom was lost. For 171 years, Smaug lay upon his hoard, sleeping, brooding, allowing the curse of dragon sickness to seep into the gold. The land around Erebor became a blackened waste, known ever after as the Desolation of Smaug. But in 2941, everything changed. Bilbo Baggins, a humble hobbit hired by Thorin's company, crept into Smaug's lair and stole a single cup from the hoard. And Smaug awoke. Dragons, as Tolkien tells us, know their treasure to an ounce. Smaug immediately sensed the theft, and his fury was terrible. He searched the mountainside, found the dwarves' ponies, and devoured them. The next day, Bilbo returned, and engaged Smaug in the most famous conversation in dragon lore. "Well, thief, I smell you and I feel your air. Come along, help yourself again. There is plenty and to spare." Bilbo, small and terrified, nevertheless kept his wits. He answered in riddles, never revealing his true name. He called himself Barrel Rider, Clue Finder, the Ring Winner, and Smaug, fascinated despite himself, could not resist. "Lovely titles," the dragon sneered. In their exchange, Smaug revealed his arrogance and his one weakness. He boasted of his armor, his impenetrable hide, the gems and gold that covered his belly like a waistcoat of diamonds. But Bilbo, sharp-eyed and clever, noticed a single bare patch, a hollow over Smaug's left breast, where the dragon's heart beat beneath heavily damaged scales. This information would save Middle-earth. Enraged by the theft and by the defiance of these barrel riders and tub-trading lakemen, Smaug left the mountain and flew south to destroy Esgaroth, the town on the long lake. He came in fire and shadow, burning homes, smashing the great house with his tail, slaughtering any who stood in his path. But a thrush, one of the birds that could speak with men, had overheard Bilbo's words. It flew to Bard the bowman, descended from Girion of Dale, and told him of the dragon's weak spot. Bard took up his last arrow, the black arrow, passed down through his line, and as Smaug circled overhead, he loosed it. The arrow flew true. It struck Smaug in the hollow of his left breast, piercing his heart. The dragon screamed, a sound of fury and disbelief, and fell from the sky. His body crashed into Esgaroth, destroying what remained of the town. Smaug the Terrible, last of the great fire drakes, was dead, but the curse of his treasure lived on. Dragon sickness claimed Thorin Oakenshield, who refused to share the gold even to aid the survivors of Esgaroth. It would take the battle of 5 armies, and Thorin's own death, to break the spell. Even the master of Laketown, given gold to rebuild, fled into the wilderness with his share, where he died alone and mad, consumed by greed. Smaug's bones remained in the ruins of the old Laketown, visible beneath the water, a grim reminder that even in death, dragons corrupt all they touch. After Smaug's fall, the great dragons were no more, but Tolkien hints that smaller dragons may have lingered in the far north, in the withered heath, breeding and hiding, waiting for some future calamity to call them forth. In a letter, Tolkien wrote, "There is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough." But he clarified, "This does not mean all dragons are gone, only that none remain with fire strong enough to harm the One Ring. Dragons, it seems, never truly vanish. They endure in shadow and legend, waiting. From Glaurung, who twisted minds and broke heroes, to Ancalagon, who shattered mountains, to Smaug, who turned kingdoms to ash, the dragons of Middle-earth were not mere monsters. They were the wrath of Morgoth given form. They were engines of despair, designed not just to kill, but to corrupt, to dominate, to leave scars that would never heal. And yet, in every age, they were defeated. Not always by strength, not always by swords, but by courage, by sacrifice, by the smallest of creatures standing against the greatest of evils. Azaghal the dwarf, driving his knife into Glaurung's belly with his dying breath. Arundel the mariner, sailing into legend to bring down Ancalagon. Bard the bowman, standing alone in the darkness, loosing a single arrow to save his people. And Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit who walked into the lair of a dragon and walked out again, alive and with a secret that would change the world. The dragons are gone, but their legacy endures. So here's my question for you. Which dragon do you think was the most dangerous? Glaurung, with his psychological manipulation and cruel cunning. Ancalagon, whose sheer power nearly won the War of Wrath? Or Smaug, whose greed and intelligence made him the perfect embodiment of corruption? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through fire and shadow, hit that subscribe button, because there are far more stories to tell from the depths of Middle-earth. Until next time, stay curious, and may your path never cross that of a dragon.